A few days ago, we had a Q&A with Russian Fishing 4, and now we're going to take a look at it. I split the Q&A into sections a bit, and there are also some extra explanations added. So let's have a look. So today, talk with RF4, we're already deep into it, starting completely with the topic zig rig, but then also afterwards about sea fishing. And especially carp fishing is going to be looked at a bit more closely again. And then there's also an extra part that deals with general questions, like what could come in the future or what's being planned, and so on and so on. And the whole thing is nicely divided into different videos so you can easily watch it all compactly. And all this is happening together with TP Catch from RF4, right? That's TP Catch Toby, an employee from RF4. So I'm the community manager for German community, so yeah, meaning forum, Discord, emails, yeah, exactly. And you can, for example, reach out to Toby if you have gameplay questions or something, like anything related to the game. And yeah, we streamers also contact Toby, for example, for events. Yeah, exactly. And I also have another question here that was posted in the evening by Kat. Moin Malene, question for the guys from RF4. Will we soon see the indicator like normal, cold, warm at the other waters too? Whoa, good question. So yeah, it's possible that we'll expand things like that. Right now, we've got that feature kind of specifically integrated into the carp waters, you could say. But that doesn't mean that zig rig only works in those 3 waters. Okay? You can also use it for buffalo fish, for wild carp, for sturgeon. Even the Aral barbel works. That's a bit easier then, because you can just go by the fish, right? So if you're fishing for silver carp, you can fish a bit higher up, like with grass carp, and sturgeon more towards the bottom. At the 3 carp waters, it's a bit more complicated because there, the water temperatures come into play already. So Ghost Life, you're just asking here how to recognize that it's simply written at the carp waters, right? Which temperature it is currently, right? Like here, we now have it in the top right, and it says, for example, normal. Yeah, and that's at Bear Lake, Bear Rock Lake, and Copper Lake. So only these 3 waters show the water temperature. At the other waters, it doesn't. Sesson also asked again, like, is it an advantage to use other methods because of catch rate or size? Yeah. So depending on migration, like you already know, depending on the migration, the bait preferences change, right? That also applies to the rigs. I mean, a lot of people always use the pop-up rig, but sometimes it can be that the hinge stiff or the shot rig is just way better for certain fish species to get a higher trophy rate or better frequency. So every rig kind of has its own like factors, just like the baits. And with the zig rig, if we now take Copper Lake or also Bear Rock Lake, you can experiment a bit there and maybe target certain fish more effectively with the depths than with some other rigs. Still, it's more complicated, right? I've seen it a few times in chat already. It's definitely more effort. So for people who don't have the patience or don't want to test so much, the zig rig might be a bit too much. In that case, you could rather fish with a match rod where it's a bit easier to adjust the depth, yeah, which kind of works like the zig rig, just the other way around, right? Exactly. Although you should ideally test the depths there too, right? And it's more active. You have to say that too, right? It's more active. You just have to pay a bit of attention. How does the float react? And depending on the fish, let's take silver carp again. When the silver carp bite, you get this up and down movement. And sometimes you react too quickly and boom, you miss the strike, right? So depending on the fish, they react differently when float fishing. You have to get used to it a bit. But yeah, that would definitely be an alternative to fishing with zig rig. Yeah, and that alone is already super important information, right? Because we have, besides the preferences of different flavors, also the preferences of the fish for different rig types. Because of course, the rig types are set at different depths in the water. So that means we'll need to test not only which boilie, which flavor, which feed mix works well for one fish or another, or how well it works at a spot with one flavor or another, but also with which rig type it works best at that spot. Super important point. If you have more questions about that, like understanding questions, or if you just want to make sure you understood it correctly, feel free to write down in the comments. I read every comment and I'll gladly respond. Let's move on to the next essential and super important point in the Q&A, and that's about feed mixes. So let's just listen in again to TP Catch's answer on feed mixes, how to use them best, and what their effect is. I would always make 3 different flavor directions. Like, if cream is currently working, then 1 rod with cream, because grazing mirror carp and mirror carp in general tend to go for that. Then something fruity, which might be interesting for certain koi types, or also for scaled carp. And then something more fishy, salmon herbs, caviar, or stuff like that. Then depending on the weather changes, you can also notice what might be more effective right now. Do you not adjust the feed somehow? I mean, if you're feeding, you basically adjust the feed to your target fish, right? If you notice, okay, I want to go more specifically for, say, scaled carp-like fish that maybe bite better on fruity stuff, then you make yourself a feed mix based more on fruit. If you say, okay, I want more creamy mirror carp, maybe also leather carp, that prefer more creamy stuff, then I'd rather make a creamy feed mix. Grass carp, yeah, same thing. Then you make a feed mix maybe with hemp or something like that, which is more tailored to those specific fish species. Because depending on the carp type, they do prefer slightly different tastes. Sure, you'll always have those all-round baits that all carp will take, but certain flavors kind of push the population more than others for different carp types. That's how you need to see it. All right, so less feed according to bait and more feed to influence a population. Exactly. And then test with different baits to see what they're currently going for. So rather, always tailor the feed mix more to your target fish than to the individual baits. Yeah. And if you, for example, throw out 2 different PVAs or feed mixes, do they mix or do they stay separate? Yeah, that could actually have a negative effect there. Because if you say one feed mix, let's say hits scaled carp and mirror carp really well, but the other species not so much, then you've got another mix that works more for the other species. Sure, you could combine them, but I'd avoid it. Then I'd rather fish in 2 different areas. So, like here, if you cast in the middle at say 30 meters and then another rod a bit further to the right, you're fishing in a completely different area. Then you can definitely offer 2 different feed mixes. If you notice, okay, I have, let's say, 3 different areas that are active close by, then you can also fish 3 different feed mixes and place each rod in those 3 areas. It can definitely be an advantage, but you also need to know, okay, these are separate areas and you're not overlapping the feeding zones. Otherwise, you'll overfeed quickly. Yeah, you need to stay out of the radius. Of course, the question is always, how big is such an area, right? So the radius is 2.5 meters, but it could be that the area is simply a bit bigger than that, 2.5 meter radius, or maybe a bit smaller. It could also be, if we look at the population, you might be right at the edge of a spot's area, and then you end up overlapping. That can happen too, right? So it's not that simple. But if you say cast 1 rod, and then the other rod, 30 meters a bit more to the right, then you're usually already in a different area, right? Yeah. Especially looking at the distance. If you cast a bit left and right, then the area is already fairly large. So that's the thing. It depends on the distance. It could even be that the populations in the 2 areas are kind of similar, but most of the time it'll never be exactly the same. Because, yeah, every area or fishing spot, let's say, always has slight differences in population. It can also be quite extreme. Like, let's say in one spot, you've got a really high population of scaled carp, and in the other spot, it's mostly mirror carp, even though they're pretty close together. That can also happen. So a bit of variation is definitely a good thing. Spread the rods out a little before you even start feeding to check where there's more activity. That's just wild. Like, that's information that's absolutely essential. I know some of you have actually been fishing like that for a long time already. That means you build a feed mix tailored to the fish and then use bait freely without already locking in a specific flavor in the feed mix. Because feed mixes, if you use something like Tutti Frutti and you've got 4 times Tutti Frutti flavor in there, then obviously that's locked in one direction and doesn't have any wide range to attract different fish at a spot. Sure, such feed mixes work too, but you're fishing in a totally one-dimensional way and only attracting in one direction. You're much more broadly positioned with a feed mix that has a wide base of flavors. Like maybe you've got corn as a base flavor in your feed mix, then you also add corn kernels. Or maybe you add peas or pumpkin as well. Don't forget, in the grocery shop, you also have a wide range of items that you can put into your feed mix. Rice grains can go in, oat flakes can go in, cheese can go in, condensed milk, milk powder. There are various flavors from the grocery shop that we can integrate into our feed mix. A base feed mix like that is of course perfect to first test the spot and to check how this base feed mix influences the spot and which populations are increased by it. In addition, we of course test at this spot which bait flavors are currently preferred. So what do the fish like right now? Is it more something creamy, something fruity, or something fishy? Yeah, and that's how you effectively test a spot that you don't even know yet. Now, up next, we've got more information about bottom fishing, about leaders, about feed mixes, about fish slipping off. So just keep listening. I'll let this run further now. So, the radius when feeding is always the same, no matter if you use PVA, a spot rocket, or feed balls, okay? So the radius for feeding itself stays the same. Rule of thumb, how many grams is too much to overfeed? That's hard to say because the ingredients are always key. Like, do you use huge particles or tiny fine ones? Depending on that, you'll overfeed faster or slower. And yeah, large particles, well, they clearly lower your frequency. You have to say that. If you use fine particles, you get more frequency, but also more small fish. What does more small fish mean? You'll still catch your keeper-sized fish and maybe even trophies, but yeah, you'll also get more small fish in the mix. With medium particles, you can kind of shift more into the keeper size range. And if you then go with pure boilies, pure pellets, or anything over 15 millimeters in particle size, then your frequency will drop. But your chance of seeing better fish goes up. That doesn't mean only good fish will bite, but you'll definitely notice the difference. Especially if, let's say, you've got a really active spot where you're catching carp constantly, and then you suddenly switch to really large particles, then yeah, you'll clearly see that frequency drops pretty hard. So is it actually intended that at Copper Lake, feed mix is like basically required, but it's almost impossible to overfeed? You can dump in as much as you want, like totally overdo it. And yeah, so it's a massive difference whether I'm staying at Bernie or like anywhere else fishing for carp, or whether I'm at Copper Lake. There you can pour it in like crazy and it's basically fine. Like without feed mix, it's always bad. But that lake is just a bit different. If you're now fishing for bream, for example, it's also not that easy to overfeed bream. Just as an example. Just to be clear, that's just one example. So depending on the water, it varies a bit. We've got F1 carp there, and yeah, they're a bit different again. You can overfeed, sure, but whether it really shows up clearly, that's another thing. So at Bear Lake, at Old Fortress, or at Bear Rock Lake, you do notice it. If you, let's say, clearly overfeed, your frequency goes down significantly. Only undersized fish are biting, and then you know, okay, yeah, I need to switch the spot. At Copper Lake, you can also see signs of that, like maybe suddenly only one fish species is biting, or only undersized fish constantly. Then I'd probably also change spots, unless you know, okay, I haven't even pre-fed here yet. So is RF4 actually happy with the current state of fish slipping off? Like the ones that get away? Well, nothing's changed about slipping off really. We get that question every month, whether the rate has increased, but no, theoretically not, right? We also often check in on players when we get a report like that, but there's usually nothing unusual going on. Of course, you can reduce the chance of slipping off, or missed bites in general, by shortening the leader length, or adjusting the hook size a bit, or the hook type. But you'll never completely get rid of fish slipping off. You'll always have a few here and there, but you can drastically reduce them, especially when bottom fishing. If you fish with shorter leaders, missed bites, players often don't even notice them, even though it's actually quite a few, to be honest, especially when you're using 45 to 60 centimeters leaders. There are a lot of carp or other species that show up as missed bites, and those aren't always undersized. They can even be trophies. You also have to say long leaders tend to have a higher chance, especially in the first 5 minutes, that the hookfish slips off during the fight, yeah? With shorter leaders, you always have better hooking efficiency. So even at the start of the fight, the fish tend to hook better and slip off less. That doesn't mean they never slip off, just to be clear. You just mentioned something again now about missed bites. That's something that was also in the forum once. You looked into an account in detail and found that a lot of these slips happen kind of in the background, right? Like you don't even really notice them. Exactly. So like 90 to 95%, at least in carp fishing or in bottom fishing, especially in carp fishing, when you're using long leaders, they're mostly missed bites. Sometimes you see it, like ding, 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 and then gone. But that doesn't always happen. Often you don't notice anything. The fish come, nibble on the bait, and you don't even notice it on the rod, and then it's a missed bite. Those missed bites happen typically in the drill time between 0.0 and 0.4 seconds. So up to 0.4 seconds, roughly, you often don't even notice them. So if you want to fish for quantity and high frequency, then it's best to go in with small bait, a short leader, and a smaller hook, and really go for catch percentages. Not necessarily just for quantity, like if you want to farm silverfish, for example, but even if you're focusing on keeper-sized fish, I'd always recommend short leaders, like 10 to 20 centimeters. That way you also catch your trophies, or even rare trophies. Now, of course, the long leaders, they're always a double-edged sword, right? You're filtering out more fish, yeah, so you get a higher rate of missed bites. That means you automatically filter out smaller fish a bit more, but at the same time, you increase the chance of a missed bite on a trophy or even a rare trophy that then slips off during the fight. And how's that with zig rig? 1.50 meters? Does that mean every fish slips off? No, it's different with zig rig. There we're using buoyancy itself, right? So we're using the monofilament leader, which gives the rig lift. That behaves a bit differently. And I think, like with the shot rig or also the hinge stiff, I'd always go for shorter leaders. Prefer stiff leader material, so preferably monofilament or fluorocarbon, right? And then rather shorter, 10 to 20 centimeters, even if you're aiming for trophies. With the regular pop-up rig or the standard carp rig, you'd go for braided material instead, right? And there, you can vary a bit and experiment. If you notice, okay, I'm fishing now with 10 or 20 centimeters, but I'm getting a lot of undersized fish, you can increase step by step until you found a point where you're satisfied. But as said, the higher you go with the leader length, the more likely you are to get more missed bites. Yeah? So there are no missed bites anymore with the zig rig? That sounds fantastic. Well, you'll still have missed bites, right? But not nearly as many as if you're fishing with regular braid and 60 centimeter leaders, okay? Yeah, the leader length, that's always the thing, right? That's what we were just talking about. So you just go in a bit shorter with the leaders if you're getting a lot of slip-offs in the beginning. Use proper hooks, shorter leaders, and maybe don't go with 60 centimeters, but try 30 or 40 centimeters instead. Now, the question that came up again here, between 30 and 60 centimeters in general, where's the better chance for a trophy? I remember it like this. 60 centimeters is more for trophy chance, right? Yeah, well, kind of. You could just as well catch trophies with 20 centimeters. You might even catch more trophies because you have fewer missed bites in the end. Okay, because with 60 centimeters, the chance that a trophy generates is of course higher. But it could also be that way more of them slip off as missed bites or during the fight. So in the end, maybe you end up with fewer trophies than with 20 centimeters. That's what I mean when I say it's a double-edged sword. Sure, the chance of better fish biting is there, but you've also got the downsides. Yeah, like fewer fish actually hook and so on. Yeah, so the fish comes in, but then slips away again. You have to factor that in. And then it depends on the rig too. Like if I'm using a hinge stiff rig, I wouldn't use long leaders at all. Just make a stiff leader setup, 10 to 20 centimeters, right? And then you're good. Leader colors? Yeah, there was some news not too long ago about that. For a long time, leader talk was always just about fluorocarbon. So leader basically meant fluorocarbon. And of course, with fluorocarbon, color doesn't matter. But if we now have mono leaders like I've got it open right now, there are different colors, like US Mono, 3D Weed, and so on, and you can match those to the bottom. Just test what color the ground is. and then pick that. Exactly. If we're fishing zig rig now, in midwater or so, where it goes straight up because of the buoyancy, then we'd rather want something neutral, so something transparent, logically, not weed, which is completely green or something. Could you use nylon for that too? Yeah, nylon mono is technically the same. It's just that some lines in our game are labeled as nylon and others as mono. But nylon mono, like that North Sea nylon line, it conveniently comes in 36 kilograms, right? Yeah, and the other one only in 31. So that's what you mean? For leaders, I'd really stick with leader material. Okay, I'm just using that one right now for something. Okay, I'm just saying for that, I'd stick with proper leader material. Okay, because I was thinking, wow, nylon, 36 kilograms, that's exactly what I need. But yeah, you also have that, like, for example, green camo weed with mono, but you don't get transparent wet. And that one's only at 31.7, that's right. My fluorocarbon in the Carbex line is only 20 kilograms or so, I think. But you can also use regular fluorocarbon there as a leader. It doesn't really make a big difference. But for the colored stuff, I definitely go with the proper leader materials. Especially important for spinning too, by the way. Like, we've got leader material here with 180 or 181 kilograms. Please don't use that in freshwater if you're spin fishing or anything like that. So that's really only for sea fishing. Like even a Wells catfish or something could bite through that. Because yeah, we've got different bite systems for sea fishing. It's completely different from freshwater. So even a 180 kilograms leader can be bitten through by a 3 kilogram pike. Just as an example, okay? Yeah, because it's a totally different system. So better to use regular fluorocarbon, maybe 55 kilograms or steel leader, okay? I had already asked about that months ago. I think I had that North Sea nylon line as my main line, and I still got bitten off within seconds. I think it was 1.0 millimeters. Like a super thick line. You'd think, okay, with fluorocarbon, that would be totally safe. Yeah, those specific lines, we really have to say, they're only meant for North Sea or sea fishing in general, because we have a totally different bite system there. Okay, so please don't use them in freshwater. Just as a heads up, because even like, sturgeon or catfish or so, that's just a totally different system. That can happen, so better to avoid that. And if players ask about it, feel free to explain it that way. Like, don't use that Atom leader nylon in freshwater. And usually, Toby already mentioned this, at Copper Lake, if you've once figured out the depth where the fish are biting, then you can also apply that to other spots. Exactly. You can match it to the water body, right? If you notice, okay, they're biting right now at 120 or 50, you can use that as a reference. Even if you switch spots later, like I said, you always have a certain tolerance range. Doesn't mean you have to go straight for 1.70 MN, but roughly you can use that as orientation. And first, you should always start with an active spot. See where the fish are biting, and then check, okay, with the marker rod, it's this deep. So they're biting at 1.20 meters right now. And if you later switch spots, the weather hasn't changed much or whatever, then you can still go in with 120 meters. You'd probably only have to adjust the leader length because the depth at the spot is different. That's how you can go about it. Basically like reverse float fishing, right? Here's another question. For example, what's better, PVA or spod rod? Like I said, if you're fishing zig rig, you can't use PVA, right? So the spod rod would be the thing there. Or yeah, sure, there are also things like baiting with boilie pipes or PVA stringers or whatever, but both work, right? I mean, if you say, okay, I'm fishing with 2 rods on zig rig and 1 on a normal carp rig, then yeah, you can just use PVA on that 1 rod. It just takes a bit longer because you're feeding only with that 1 rod using PVA, compared to hammering in the portions with a spod rocket. Now, Nalaton just wrote something. Wait a second. It's going quite well right now. 40 bites with 10 centimeter to 30 centimeter leaders. Now the question is, what zone are you fishing in, right? Like, are you fishing in a shallow area or something? Because the leader length alone, it's always hard to say, right? If you're fishing near the bank, 30 centimeters can already put you in the upper layer. And if you're casting way out, 30 meters deep, and you've got a 30 centimeter leader, then of course you're in a completely different zone. GL, at your spot. I think Nalaton said earlier, he's at my spot. Yeah, right. But again, the question is, how far? Even at this same spot, you can cast 5 meters and it works, or some people have cast 30 meters and that worked too. So with Zig Rig, if you want to share spots later, then it's really helpful to say, okay, I'm fishing here at, say, 4033. My current clip is so-and-so, and the depth is this, and the leader length is that. Then someone can go, oh, okay, it's 150 meter deep here with a 10 centimeter leader. That means the fish are biting at 1.40 meter. If he now switches to a 2 meter spot, he can also fish 1.40 meter by using a 60 centimeter leader. That's how you can kind of imagine it, so that you're transferring the depth zone, not the leader length, because the ground depth is different, right? So you stay in roughly the same area and then match the leader length to that to hit the same water depth, right? So if you're at a shallower or deeper spot, you just need to vary the leader length to offer your bait at the same water depth. Yeah, so right now John is saying, cool stuff, but why not make it so you can set depth and height, like in float fishing, so you don't have to constantly change leaders? Yeah, well, in float fishing, you set the depth using a stopper, for example. Like, let's go with real life fishing now, right? You set the depth like that, or directly through a fixed float. With Zig Rig, you're using monofilament leaders, and they're fixed in length. Sure, there are also systems where you can adjust the depth using underwater floats or something, but that's not in the game. So we decided to have fixed leaders that you just swap depending on the spot. Let's say the fish are biting at 150 meter right now. Then you can apply that to the whole water body in theory. You just have to adjust the leader length depending on how deep it is at that particular spot. One spot might be, for example, 2.00 meters deep, and another more like 2.40 meters. And depending on where you are, you just have to adjust the leader length accordingly. And like we said, we always recommend from our side to use monofilament line because of the buoyancy. Even when bottom fishing, I wouldn't use braided or anything. Instead, go for colored monofilament lines, like weed or something, right? We've got the transparent ones, and then also these colored ones. So maybe you can also use them, but I would always stay on monofilament, yeah? And I'll gladly show that again here. So even when you go for sturgeon, for example, right? You'll definitely notice some difference in the frequency, I think. Like my colleagues also kind of noticed it. If you fish with mono, you notice slight differences. Also with sturgeon, we've got those Carp X lines. I don't think the mono version comes in 36 kilograms, but you've got the weed version, like 3D weed. And there are different bottom types. So if you're fishing for sturgeon, you go more with 10 centimeter leaders. And you can use those lines with 36 kilograms. You're already tied to 36 kilograms anyway because of the lead core, so yeah. Are there special hook shapes that are preferred? Like hooks just for Zig Rig? Well, I've basically just used the regular hooks from size 2 to 5. The curved shank work, the Carp, not Car X. But you can also use the shot style ones and such. But in theory, I just fish with the curved shanks and so on. Just don't go too big, right? Like, if you're using 8mm baits or something, then you can totally go with a size 6 hook. You don't need to go super big, like just for testing where the fish are first. Go in small. Maybe test just one color first, small, and then step by step go bigger, right? You already mentioned the other day we had a quick chat that the whole Zig Rig thing is maybe not really for beginners, because it's all about testing, right? You can't just copy something and blindly fish a spot. You have to stay actively involved all the time, right? Sure, you can fish active spots. That's not a problem. Just check the trophy channel or your community channels. If there are active spots for carp, barbel, or sturgeon that get shared, you can fish them with Zig. But of course, you need to actively check the depth first with a marker rod. If you don't fish with a marker rod, it's super tough because you want to find out first what depth the fish are biting at in that body of water. So if you now have an active spot, let's say clipped at 20 meters, you first need to find out how deep it is there. That helps a lot in float fishing too, especially at those 3 waters where the water temperature is now also shown. And then you want to check how deep are the fish. If you're now, for example, at a 1.80 meter spot and you're getting bites at 1.50 meter, let's stay with that simple example of 1.50 meter. Then you know, okay, I need to go with a 30 centimeter leader here. And if you switch to a spot that's 2.00 meter deep, you just change to a 50 centimeter leader to be back at 1.50 meters again. Yeah, exactly. That doesn't mean, though, that they'll always bite at exactly 150 meter, of course. In the evening hours, it can shift a bit. That's why it's smart. Once you've figured out at which spot and at what depth the fish bite, it's always good in the evening or morning to at least change one rod to a different depth. Maybe go to 10 centimeters or even a bit higher to see if there's more activity lower down, or maybe higher up, right? But yeah, just copying doesn't really work. So if someone posts a zig rig spot with a certain depth, it can work, of course. But in theory, you should figure out the depth yourself, because one day is not the same as another, different temperatures and so on. Absolutely. And you should also, like we said, you kind of need to know the rod length might vary, so the clip distance might vary too. And the depth can vary a bit as well. That's why it's important to bring a bit of your own initiative. So, that was already super exciting, really important info about the whole bottom fishing and carp fishing topic from the last Q&A. Big thanks again to TP Catch from the RF4 team, and I'm super curious to see how we now go into carp fishing with this new info. Test. If you have questions, feel free to write them below in the comments. If you have any questions to clarify things, write them down there too. I'll gladly answer those as well. Petri Limels, good luck fishing. See you next time.